Intro. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Recovering Athlete Podcast. And this is actually, man, this is my first repeat guest on the Recovering Athlete Podcast. And boy, I wouldn't want it to be anyone else other than my man, Mike Robbins, who's done an incredible body of work. And if you want to go back and reflect on his previous podcast, you'll learn a little bit more about his transition from pro baseball player, Stanford University, New York Yankees, to being one of the premier keynote motivational and thought leaders in and about the corporate landscape. So, Mike, dude, so glad to have you back.
Please, thanks for having me back, man. I'm honored to be the first repeat guest. I, hope I don't screw this up, but thanks for inviting me back on for the second time.
Well, let's just say you nailed it the first time. So I'm feeling pretty confident in your ability.
Good. Well, it's good to talk to you again.
But what a great time to have you back on, because we are in quite a unique environment in this day and age. And as at the standing of this recording, we are about a week, depending on where you live, 2 or 3 into a quarantine,
right,
or shelter in place,
right,
lifestyle. And you who are someone who is very active in working with corporations and leaders in building high performance teams, building leaders. And I just think it's really unique that in this place and time, you are out there with your content, and more specifically, you got a new book coming out.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the new book.
Well, it's crazy, man. I mean, yeah. So I wrote this book called We're All in This Together. And, I wrote it last year. You know how books go, right? And I knew it was going to be coming out in 2020. And one of the reasons I wrote, the book's really about how to create a culture of high performance, trust, and belonging, which for the last 20 years, my work has focused a lot in the corporate world on helping teams and organizations create strong cultures where people can thrive. And secondarily, I wanted the book to come out this year and at this time with this title, We're All in This Together, because I know that that's a core element. You think of all the best teams you've ever been a part of, right? Even with all the different egos and personalities, there's some way that we get past all of that and like, hey, we're all in. The goal we have is bigger than anybody's individual achievement. It's about us, right? But also because we live in this world that's incredibly divisive right now, and it's us and them, it's good and bad, it's left and right, it's all these different divisions, that I really wanted to speak to that a little bit, that I don't actually think that serves us. I had no idea, of course, no expectation, nor did any of us, that my book was going to come out in the midst of a global pandemic. And what's been fascinating about this whole experience on so many levels, Cletus, is that literally from the President of the United States to Tom Hanks to Michael Stipe to whoever, like, I'm hearing people literally use that phrase, whether it comes out of their mouth or it's in social media posts, because I think now more than ever in any time in my life that I can remember, ironically, we're all socially isolated from each other in our homes, hunkered down. So we're separated by space, but we're actually in this experience all together at the same time, not just here. You're in Seattle, I'm in San Francisco, people here in the United States, but around the world. So it is kind of interesting and sort of odd time, but maybe fortuitous in some weird way to have a book coming out right now that's got that title.
I've had a couple of friends send me a video of Bill Gates kind of predicting this 5 years ago. Yeah. Is it safe to say that you predicted this, Mike? Is that why you did?
No.
You timed it?
No, look, I watched that same TED Talk of Bill Gates's from whatever that was, 4 or 5 years ago, and was like, oh, geez, I guess we all should have been watching this. But, no, I think, though, what's interesting about this, and again, as people listen to this, there's so many different layers to it. And again, without in any way minimizing it, because look, the reality is this is real. This is significant. People are getting sick. People are dying. We don't know how this is all going to play out. It's obviously impacted the economy and brought it almost to a standstill, which we've never seen before. We don't know what, I keep saying to people, anyone who says they know how this is going to play out is either crazy or lying. But one of the many things that I've been realizing for myself is, in the same way, I think sometimes when we go through a traumatic experience personally, we go through a big life change, like the end of our sports career, we go through a loss, a death. One of the silver linings of those painful experiences, I know this has been true for me in my life, is there's a reorientation back to what and who matter most. And I feel like this time right now is definitely having that impact on me and so many people I'm talking to, because the truth is, so much of the normal way we go about doing life and doing our business and doing our work and our kids in school and all the other elements, it's like those things aren't happening. So we're having to kind of turn within and look at our friends, family, whoever's close with, whoever we're hunkered down with, and go, wow, like, who am I right now and what matters to me and what do I want to focus on? And the truth is, life and school and business is still happening, even though it's altered. And so our ability to figure out how we come together and how we connect with each other. Well, you and I were talking right before you hit record that you and I, as people who go out in the world to speak at events, like, there's no events happening. So can we here on Zoom or on Skype or whatever, figure out how to still communicate and connect? Can leaders who are used to having their teams all sit in a room where they hash out problems and challenges and goals and, write stuff on the whiteboard and look at slides, can we do that in a virtual environment? And of course, the answer is yes, we can. It's just a little more challenging, or we have to get a little more creative, or we have to really focus more specifically on how do we connect and engage with each other when we're not sitting in the same room with each other.
Something that I've been really holding on to as I've grown is the idea that uh, competency is not an option, right? And I think in where we stand today is right. Business is kind of moving. It's still going. It looks a little different. And for those who are competent in their ways of leading and managing teams and bringing people together, and are unwilling to actually take a step back and go, I got to figure out a new way to do this,
Right.
are going to be in a world of hurt.
It's true.
So what would be a good way for someone who's in a leadership position, or someone who, gosh, managing the household of kids? Right? I mean, that's a team.
Right.
How, any ideas or thoughts and ways on how we can improve ourselves in this day and time at this stature?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think there's a few things that I've been thinking about recently and writing and talking about to try to navigate myself as a person who speaks and teaches, but also has a team of my own that I lead, as well as my family, and talking to a lot of the leaders that I work with and our team works with. Look, first of all, I think it's important for everyone to acknowledge none of us have been through this before. Now, we have been through other times of uncertainty, times of chaos, times of challenge, every single one of us. It's not usually all happening at the same time. And while the circumstances of this are different, every single leader I'm talking to and every person I'm talking to, I try to remind them, myself included, look, we have more than this requires. We have all dealt with situations and challenges that when we first looked at it, we said, oh my gosh, I don't know how to figure that out. I'm not going to be able to get through it. Like, think about parenthood. How many times for you as a father, for me as a father, I've thought to myself, this was not in the instruction manual. I don't think I'm going to have an answer for this one. This is really too hard. And we figure it out. Right. So I think it's important to recall times in our lives individually and collectively when we've had to go through something hard, something new, something different. It's the first time. So, of course, we're going to bumble our way through it a little bit, but that's an important element. The second thing I think that's really important is, as best as we can, to take care of ourselves in the process. There's a tendency as a parent, as a leader, as someone in charge of other people. Of course, we care about them. Of course, we want to make sure they're okay, but we also have to tend to ourselves. And that means, as much as possible, the things that we know how to do. I mean, basic things, am I getting enough sleep? Am I eating? This morning, I got up and actually had a really good meditation and a good workout. And it was like, oh, it'd been a while because I've been sort of running on adrenaline. And I realized I really need to double down on my self-care practices, but also emotionally, right? We can't lead other people through a change or a challenge if we're not actually leading ourselves through it. So the third part of it is also being real and being authentic. Now, sometimes, again, think of the parent analogy. Sometimes we don't tell our kids everything that's going on. We don't say, well, mom and dad are thinking about getting a divorce right now, because that's not an appropriate conversation to have with them, especially if they're of a certain age, or we're not exactly sure how we're going to pay the mortgage next month. Like, okay, we don't need to freak them out with oversharing certain details. But again, when it comes to leaders and teams, we can tell the truth. I heard this great analogy, Cletus, a couple of weeks ago about leadership in times of challenge. And the example was like a pilot of an airline. So you're on the plane, the pilot comes on sometimes and says, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. we're going to hit some bumps here in just a minute. And so we've told the flight attendants take a seat, and we're going to discontinue the service until we get through this, but we're going to find some, better air, and, just lets us know what's happening. And then when the bumps come, even if they're big, we're like, whoa, these are big, but like he told me, so I know it's under control. If we just hit the bumps and they don't say anything, and like flight attendants are flying and everyone's like, oh my, what is happening? And then if the pilot doesn't come on to say anything, or if they do, I've had this happen before, come on, oh, don't worry about it, it's no big deal. You're like, it's a big deal, right? Like that's not what we want to be doing. So telling the people around us the truth, we don't know the future, we don't know what holds, but like this might be bumpy, and I don't know exactly how long. I know we'll eventually get through it, but like, again, those kind of things that leaders can do can really help as people are trying to navigate this uncertain time.
For athletes in general,
Yeah.
and especially these former athletes who have rolled out into careers and leadership and jobs and so forth, and then I'm going to transition to a lot of people in general have
Yes.
a difficulty with vulnerability.
Yes.
And you sparked something when you said, in these changes, we have to know we're going to get through it.
Right.
And yet what I find is time and time again, so many of us are struggling with being vulnerable. And now we're at a time right now where we're going to have to be having these conversations with the kids running around the background and in our PJs, because we haven't quite,
right.
The authenticity, right? The authentic selves are coming out in this.
Totally.
And I'm just curious, how is that? How does vulnerability really play into this? And how can a leader, or how can, a former athlete like myself, or someone who's in a career, like how can we maximize this time to really dive into our vulnerability and use it to our advantage?
Right. Well, what's funny? I mean, I think it's an interesting paradox with respect to former athletes like me and you, particularly male athletes, right? Now, look, not all of us are the same, whether we played sports or not, whether we're male or female, but there are certain traits to us as athletes, right? We're taught as athletes, especially male athletes, suck it up, be a man, boys don't cry, rub some dirt on it, whatever, all the cliches you can think about that are supposed to, but the irony of sports, whether it's football, I never played football, by the way, because I didn't like getting hit and was too scared, but in baseball, in any sport, what happens in sports? We fail, and we fail publicly. It's actually incredibly vulnerable. You go out on the field to play football, you could not only lose and get embarrassed, you could literally get your head knocked off, right? In baseball, I was a pitcher. You do bad enough, you give up a home run, the manager comes and takes you out of the game in front of everyone. It's like, you make an error, the ball goes between your legs to lose the game. I mean, you strike out with the bases loaded. You're in basketball, you miss the free throw to lose the game at the end. I mean, there's every sport, you go down the list. So we actually know and have embraced a lot of vulnerability in terms of what we do. There aren't too many things. When I first, stopped playing baseball, I went into sales for a couple of years. Then I started speaking. I remember some of my first speeches. I was so nervous, but I would say to myself, literally, okay, no matter how bad this goes, and it might go really bad, no one's going to stop me mid-speech and take me off stage and replace me with someone else. And that used to happen to me when I was playing baseball, right? So I think I'll be okay. So that's a long way of saying we think we don't know how to be vulnerable, and we're not so vulnerable emotionally, right? Like we don't express and emote necessarily. However, we've learned a lot about vulnerability in terms of failure and public failure and competitive failure. Now, most of us as athletes, former athletes, however long it's been, didn't like to lose, didn't like to fail, but it was just part of the deal. Like, unless you literally went undefeated your whole career, which no one I know had that happen, you lost some big games and had some moments where you really blew it. And those were the ones that often, I think, teach us the most. So back to your question about how can we embrace vulnerability right now, part of it is to realize we actually know how to do it. It's just got to be reframed and in a different context, right? Because again, this notion of like, I'm going to be tough, I'm going to be strong, I'm going to suck it up and muscle through this thing, it doesn't work, first of all, and it's not healthy for us, and it doesn't engender a sense of confidence with the people around us. Now, we don't want to freak out our kids or our team or anyone, but like when I'm talking to people right now and they're like, oh, this is awesome, no big deal, no, it's going to be fine, we'll be better on the other side. Like, I'm getting nervous as they're saying that to me. I'm like, are you not paying attention to what's going on? Like, this is kind of a big deal. Like, you don't have to be like freaked out to the point where you're not willing to walk out of your house or do anything. But at the same time, like, to not have a sense of the moment and a sense of the significance of the moment, that's a problem as well. And so embracing vulnerability is, we've thought of for many years vulnerability as this like dirty word, this bad thing, this thing to avoid. What we now know, and science is now teaching us this, it's actually essential to human trust and connection. It's essential to change and innovation. It's essential to so many things. If we're not willing to embrace the discomfort of vulnerability, we can't grow, we can't learn.
Mm. You know what? And something you just said has reminded me of conversations I've had over the last couple of weeks with some employees of corporations who have sent them home to
Mm-hmm.
work remotely.
Right.
And they're all bonding with one another saying, don't mess this up. let's perform well. Let's
Yep.
hit our numbers so
Yep.
that this can be something that we can do
Right.
going forward.
Maybe
Right?
we don't have to go back to the office.
We don't get back to the office. And I think that's a reality for a lot of people who are at home right now going, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I may be able to swing this. And I also know that there's leaders on the other end going, how can I build a healthy team culture when I'm not physically with them or we're remote? How does that
Right.
work?
Well, I think a couple things. The funny thing is, on the one side, you're right. There might be people that say, hey, let's not blow this because, hey, maybe we'll get to do this when the dust settles and life comes back to some sense of normalcy. What I am hearing, though, similarly, normally this notion of working from home is thought of as a privilege. It's this cool thing you get to do. Hey, our company's cool. It's flex. We work remotely. We're distributed. And that can be great. What I'm noticing now, and a lot of people are saying as well, it's like, yeah, it's one thing to get to do it. It's another thing to have to do it. And for those of us who are more extroverted or really like being around people, it's like, I can't see everybody. I can't go into the office. That's different than a choice as to do it or not do it. I do think this is going to fundamentally change the way we do work after this is all over, because we're now going to realize like, oh, we actually can get a lot more done than we thought we could when we're not in the same physical space. And I think we're also going to learn there are certain intangible elements of being able to gather together in person that we're never going to lose and want to get away from. So it's a bit of both. That said, look, for many years, one of the questions I get asked by leaders all the time, I mean, pre-coronavirus, sort of working from home, isolated, all this, is how do I engage with my team when not everybody's in the same location? Because like whether I'm working with Google or Wells Fargo or Charles Schwab or any of these big companies, sometimes the team all exists in the same city, in the same building, but more often than not, if not the team, then definitely some of the cross-functional partners are in different offices around the US, around the world, and or customers or clients. So again, it's not, the 1970s where business is all done face to face or maybe on the telephone. It's right. So, and what my response usually is like, look, I have a couple people on my team that don't live locally and I don't get to see all that often. So what I know for myself, but also coaching a lot of leaders and managers over the years is you have to come up with practices and institute certain kind of sort of techniques that you use individually for yourself with each of the people on your team that work for you and them and their personality and their style and how they communicate, as well as the team collectively. It's now to a whole other level that every single person, even if you're used to being in the office with them, now everyone's at home. Their kids are home from school. They're all the other factors that are going on. So is it harder? Yes. Is it impossible? No. It just takes a certain amount of intention, awareness, and it actually takes quite a bit of emotional intelligence, because even with all of the great technology, like you and I are doing this on Zoom right now, it doesn't matter how great the technology is. We have to connect emotionally and personally with people. And, not impossible to do on Zoom or on the phone or on all kinds of other platforms, but just harder to do than if we're all sitting in the same room.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are sharing the same sentiment that we are going to change.
Yeah.
Something's going to change going forward.
Totally.
And how we connect, how we do business, how we show up for work, what work looks like.
And think of all the things we're learning. Like my wife just recently decided that she wanted to do a book club with some girlfriends of hers because they're all feeling disconnected and isolated. And so this great book, Untamed, by our friend Glennon Doyle, just came out. It's a great big best-selling book. And Michelle sent out a note on Facebook and said, hey, does anybody else want to do this? We'll do a book club. We'll do it virtually. And a bunch of her friends jumped to yes. And then she's like, I don't know how to use Zoom, right? So I go in and I'm just helping her out. But the funny part was there were so many of her friends who got on who weren't familiar with the platform, just as an example. But it's like, and then afterwards, she's like, oh, that was so cool. And there was a bunch of us and we were kind of laughing that it was this new thing. But again, it's sort of a simple, sort of superficial example. but how many things are we all going to learn? We're learning right now in this process, and we're going to learn. My 14-year-old Samantha said the other day, "Hey Dad, you know what's really cool? When this is all over, you know how much we're going to appreciate a bunch of stuff we weren't appreciating before." And it just, like, it really warmed my heart. And again, I say this all in the context of, this is not to minimize. There are people listening to us right now, or people that we know who
Mhm.
are sick or going to get sick, or, potentially could pass away. I mean, this is not like, but the reality is, at least from what it seems like and what I'm hoping, is that most of us are going to be fine, whether we get sick or not. And this experience, as we've been trying to tell our girls without being too sort of hyperbolic about it, like, hey, girls, pay attention right now, because this is going to be a story you're going to tell for the rest of your life.
Mhm.
Like, what happened when the coronavirus showed up and everyone had to stay at home for however long that was. Your kids, your grandkids are going to want to know about that, because this is a pretty significant moment in the history of the world.
Mm. I love it. Hey, let's switch gears for a second
Yeah.
and talk about something that we actually have not talked about before,
Okay.
but I'm going to bring it up because I know you reference it in your new book. We're
Mm-hmm.
all in this together.
Yep.
And that is, you and I share another bond in that we both have had a sister pass away
Oh, I
in
didn't
our
know that.
lives. And you talk about your sister Lori
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
that the loss there and some of the losses that you've suffered in your life. How how have you handled that?
Hmm. Well, I appreciate you asking, and I'm sorry I didn't know about your sister, and obviously we have that unfortunate but
Hmm.
significant bond. My sister Lori died at the beginning of 2016. She died of ovarian cancer, which she had for a little less than 4 years, and it came on the heels. She got diagnosed 9 months after our mom passed away from lung cancer. So it was, and our dad passed away many years ago, about 18 years ago. So, for me, I'm curious your experience with this. It was and has been and continues to be, even 4 years later, 4+ years later, I still sometimes will turn to Michelle, my wife, especially about Lori specifically, and say, is my sister really dead? Like, there's still
Hmm.
kind of this weird, like, of course I know it's true, but it just seems so bizarre. And in a weird way, although what's happening right now with the coronavirus and everything is so different, I still will turn to Michelle. And even though it's brand new, I'll say, is this really happening? Are we really at home and like the world's shutting? Like, is that really, because it's such sort of, it doesn't even compute. And for me, when Lori died, even though she'd been sick for almost 4 years, there was this sense of like, she's my big sister, like my person growing up. Our parents split up when I was 3. My sister was like, she had my back. She taught me so many things about so many things, um, that, and our relationship, it ebbed and flowed and had its twists and turns over the years. But like, it was, especially at the time, and even all these years later, I've done a lot of good grief work, but it was so disorienting for me, even more so than my parents passing away. Because it's like, I remember saying to people for months after, how they'd ask me how I was doing, and I'd say, I'm okay. Like, I'm definitely grieving, but I kept saying, I don't know where I am in space. It's like this weird sort of experience, like in sports when you kind of know where you're supposed to be on the field, and then something changes or you change positions and you're like, whoa, this is weird. I'm like, I don't have the same reference points or something. And that's kind of how it felt for me at the time emotionally, was like, I don't have my bearings quite yet. And, you know, so yeah, it's been quite a journey that I've learned a lot from. And I definitely miss. I mean, I was actually having this conversation just earlier today with everything that's going on in the world right now. It is really weird for me to not be able to talk to either of my parents or my sister, just from that kind of sort of, tribal sort of root chakra. Like, where are my people? Where are the people who've known me my whole life, that we can just check in and saying like, are you having this crazy experience? Because I'm having this crazy experience, that reality check.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a trip.
Hmm. And and I think relating it back to what's real for today. I mean, there are a lot of people who are losing family members.
Yeah.
Just obviously, it happens every day, but specifically to this virus, and yet we still have to get back up and tie our shoes and get back out there
We do.
and get back to work.
It's true. And it's funny, because I do think that what's happening right now, to me, again, I don't know what your experience was like with losing your sister, or and anyone listening who's lost someone significant. there's that weird thing that happens, right? Like someone close to us dies and it's like our whole world turns upside down. And yet at the same time, the world keeps going. And it's kind of, people show up for the memorial service or they send cards or they do all the things in the first few days or weeks and it's beautiful. And then like their life moves on. But it's like my sister died. And, again, people are usually kind and compassionate about it. But 3 months later, 6 months later, 9 months later, the world keeps moving. And it's like, but wait a minute, like this huge thing just happened. And, there's literally billions of people on the planet that didn't know and didn't care, not because they don't care, like in some mean way, but like, and that's, I think, the difference right now is that we're having this thing happen globally in a sense that not everyone's going to get sick and clearly not everyone's going to die, but this is impacting all of us in different ways. And similarly, though, one of the things that I always appreciated and have appreciated of my experiences of grief, as painful as they've been, is that there is a way, at least my experience of it has been, that it kind of quiets everything down. The BS of life kind of moves to the side. And what comes front and center is what and who matter most. And everything else is sort of secondary. And in a different kind of way, I've been experiencing some of that in recent weeks, that it's like, okay, this is disorienting. This is weird. I don't know exactly how to even feel about what's happening right now. I still need to get up every day and be with our girls and my wife and do my work in whatever altered way I need to do it and all that. But it's like, what matters and who matters, and if literally like the whole world comes to a standstill and the global economy completely goes off a cliff, like, am I going to be okay? I think so. I'm going to focus on Michelle, my wife, and Samantha and Rosie, our girls, and the people I love and the work that I do and the things that matter to me most. So I do think there's actually a lot of interesting analogies. One other ironic and somewhat different analogy to right now, my experience as an athlete, Cletus, especially being injured, like my career ultimately ended because of an injury, but I had some injuries along the way. And getting hurt as an athlete, as you know, sucks, right? It's like the worst. Not only is it physically painful, but it's like you don't get to play. And then you have to go have surgery or whatever, get it looked at or get it treated, and then wait and then rehab and then get back. And that whole time is like so long that when I've been thinking about, is this going to last 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 months? I don't know. But I'm like, you know what? I remember that feeling watching everyone else get to play when I didn't get to play and having to sit there and go, my arm hurts. I just had surgery. Now I got a rehab, which is going to be painful and boring. And then when I get back, I'm going to have to work my way all the way back up. I don't even know if I'll be any good at the end of all that and remember how to play, let alone be able to compete. But it's a mental game more than a physical one. And that's part of what I think right now, when I start catastrophizing about this is going to go on forever and everything's going to, I go, hold on a second, calm down. That's all the crazy noise in your head. Just focus on the present moment. Like when I was rehabbing my arm, it used to be, okay, just show up for physical therapy today and see if you can make some progress. Don't try to think about how am I going to pitch a shutout in 12 months because I don't know what's going to get me there. But I know today I can show up and take on rehab like it's the most important thing I have to do. And that's what I'm trying to do with my work and my life right now, is show up in this moment with you, bring all of myself to it, and trust the next moment I'll keep trying to bring all of myself. And like, I think that's all we can do.
Mm-hmm. You know what, you talk about uh, being all in this together and
Mm-hmm.
humanizing the process, being vulnerable, uh, tying in the emotional intelligence piece to it. Do you have, and for someone who's listening going, yeah, you know what, gosh, I get it, I see
Mm-hmm.
it, that all makes sense. However, I'm going to work remotely right now, or
Right.
maybe sometime in the future I'll head back to work, and my company does not bring that type of mentality or that type of
Right.
culture to us. And so, they don't have anything to compare it against. Now they're hearing this going,
Right.
wow, this is an eye opener for me. What is an example, or do you have some examples of organizations or cultures that are using these type of principles and these actions that you're talking about in ways that we can look at and go, oh, I got it.
Absolutely. I mean, look, there's lots of companies, big and small. One company that comes to mind actually has an office up in Seattle where you are. They're based down in San Diego. It's a commercial real estate company called Hughes Marino that I've had a chance to partner with for the last decade almost. And they're a small commercial real estate company, really small. When I first started working with them, they had about 15 um, agents, employees, brokers. Basically what they do is they help companies find office space, right? And they help them, and they just focus on the client side. So they don't represent building owners. And when they first hired me, they had just reconstituted their company. And in the commercial real estate world, which I found out and I didn't know, not usually focused on culture, not usually that focused on people, very internally competitive. You can make a lot of money in commercial real estate, but it's kind of a cutthroat business. And like you and I could be on the same team, quote unquote, but like we're going after the same business and we're throwing sharp elbows at each other. And Jason Hughes, who he and his wife started the company, Shay, he basically said, we want to create a family. We want to create an environment where people care about each other and we're all in this together, basically. I don't know if he used that exact phrase, but that was basically why he reached out to me and had me come speak at their offsite. This was almost 10 years ago. And fast forward 10 years, I've spent hours and hours and hours with the team at Hughes Marino at least once or twice a year, going down to San Diego, and they have offices in LA and Orange County and San Francisco and Seattle and other places now. And they've grown. And the key to their growth, I mean, they're smart, they hire really good people, they do a great job, but they've really invested in culture and coming up with core values and really living by them and taking these things that on the surface seem kind of soft in some ways, but really implementing them into this is how we operate, this is how we do business. And they're focused on the outcome, they're focused on the bottom line, but they're focused on the people. And again, from the outside looking in, you wouldn't think a small commercial real estate company based in San Diego, they now have 100 and some employees in all these different markets. They get rated as like, the best place to work for companies of their size. And one of the reasons that that's the case is because this is front and center. When you walk into their office, their main office in San Diego, what you see is one of their core values is, we operate as a family. And like on the video screen in the middle of their office, which is beautiful, is a scrolling slideshow of photos of the people that work there from vacation, not from the corporate event where they're all, in their little, shirts that match, but like, and there are some of those too, but it's like, here's pictures of, someone right after the baby's born. Here's pictures of someone and their family on vacation or doing fun things. I mean, that's something little, but it just speaks to what they've done to really infuse their culture in a real personal way. And so the thing that I would say for anyone listening, if you work for a company, big or small, where it doesn't seem like the company invests in it, that's a challenge, but it's not a deal breaker. Because the truth is, we all have influence on the people around us. A culture is only really made up of a bunch of individuals. Think of sports team. Now, it helps if the quarterback of the football team or the head coach, if you will, or whoever the leader is, the leader on defense, whatever, happens to be a team-oriented, positive, uplifting person, but it's not essential. You can still have a strong team culture without that. It's harder in the sports context, but in a business environment, it's great if the CEO and the executive team and the company is really committed to that and invested. But even if they are, it's still about people all the way down through the organization buying in and operating that way. And if you happen to work for a company, even a really big one, and think, oh, the culture, the macro culture here isn't that strong, really what most people experience their jobs as is their boss, their direct teammates, anyone they might manage, and the people that they interact with on a regular basis. So you could work for, Wells Fargo that has 275,000 employees. You're not interacting with most of those people. You're interacting with the people on your team. You could work for Google, which has like, I don't know, almost 100,000 employees right now. You're interacting with the people on your team or the people you do business with. So the question then becomes is how do I show up and what influence do I have on the people around me? How can I move the needle on the culture in the way that I want it to be?
So I'm going to throw out a question to you that I received a couple months back when I did a talk to a FBS school, Division I university, all their athletic coaches, and I'm in there talking about the development of human beings first.
Yeah.
And the head nods are there. Everyone's, yep, I got it. Yep, we want to. And the night before, I polled their athletes, all 300 student athletes. I said, stand up if you're here because you want to develop yourself as a better human being. Sit down if you're here just to be a better athlete. And of 300, maybe 295 stood up. So I showed the pictures to the coaches. I said, here's what your athletes are looking for. And so they said, oh, okay, we got it. At the very end, the coach asked the question. And then, of course, all the coaches got in on it that I want to propose to you.
Yeah.
So Cletus, sounds all great. However, if I don't win games, I lose my job.
Mm.
If I don't generate revenue or hit my numbers, I
Right.
lose my job.
Yeah.
How does that work together?
It's tricky, right? Because the reality is both things can be true at the same time, right? And look, the truth of the matter is, and this is where it becomes fascinating and almost paradoxical, right? Because whether we're talking college sports or pro sports, especially, or we're talking business or the work you and I do, at any level, results matter. They do, right? I mean, it's like, hey, my favorite athlete right now, maybe my favorite athlete of all time is Steph Curry. I grew up in the Bay Area. I've been a Warriors fan since I was a kid. I love basketball.
Homer.
I played basketball growing up. I wasn't all that good at it. I mean, I was like made the varsity team in high school, but I mean, baseball was my sport. But I love watching. Basketball has always been my favorite sport to watch. It's just like I love it. And the Golden State Warriors, as you know, were terrible for a long time. Like, right? 40 years between championships in 75 and 2015, and 26 of those 40 years, they were under 500. So the fact that they got good the last few years and then happened to be like the best team in basketball for 5 years in a row was just like unbelievable to me and so many of us fans. That said, I think if Steph played for the Lakers or the Bulls or the Knicks or any other team, I think I would still have a real deep appreciation for him. The reason why I love him so much is because he just seems to be such an authentically joyful, grateful human being, in addition to being an extraordinary athlete. Now, I say all that, if the Warriors had sucked for the last 6 years and Steph didn't score, 25 or 30 points a game and break 3-point records and all that stuff, I mean, maybe he plays for our local team, so I'd pay a little, but I wouldn't be paying as much attention to Steph Curry. There are probably other humans walking around on the planet, other basketball players in the NBA who are equally as extraordinary human beings who I don't know about or have never heard of because Steph Curry, you know what I mean? So it goes together. And I say all that to say, like, there is truth in the fact that winning games matters, producing results matters. If we don't do those things, we might be held accountable. We might be asked to leave. The thing, though, where it ties in, and you know this, man, because this is the core of your work, right? That at the end of the day, focusing on the development of human beings, whether it's student athletes or employees at a company, is not just a good thing to do like in an altruistic way. It's actually what leads to performance. So if it doesn't lead to performance, it's still a win because we're developing human beings. And what you and I both know from the work we do and all the research tells us is when you develop human beings, guess what? They perform better. So it doesn't have to be an either or, but on the surface, sometimes it seems like that. Oh, I got to just focus on winning. That other stuff is after the fact. It's like, no, developing them is going to help you win. And if you happen to lose while you're developing, guess what? You still kind of win anyway. You might lose your job because you didn't win enough football games, but you still won because you were a great coach and you created great humans who are going to go out in the world. And I know you know this, man. I'm preaching to the choir, but like most of those athletes, even at the highest level, they're not going to play in the NFL for 10 years. They're not going to be superstar pro athletes. They're going to, right? Remember the NCAA had those commercials, when was it, 10, 15 years ago? Blah, blah, blah. There's this many athletes. Most of us are going to go pro in something else other than our sport. Like, I loved those commercials because that's the truth, right? For every first round draft pick in the NBA or the NFL that comes out of college or in baseball, like I played, the vast majority of even the really good ones that have success, this is all about life skills. This is all about making you a better human, not just a better athlete.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One final thought that I want to get from you, and this may hit near and dear to your heart.
Yes.
But one thing I find rampant, especially with in corporate, doesn't have to mean former athletes, but former athletes tend to, I don't know, I talk about to them a lot, so it's in my wheelhouse. But
yes,
there's this win at all cost mentality that we had as athletes, and a bit short-sighted in that, and we just weren't quite taught a different way,
right?
And that carries over into the workforce.
Yeah.
And now there's this win at all cost mentality that we have, where kind of like the commercial real estate world, where we're trying to win at the sake of our teammate losing,
right?
Or we're trying to win at the sake of a competitor, biting the dust, whatever it may be. And I find it pretty prevalent, and it showed up in Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
this past year, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the Astros.
Yes.
And so uh, I would love your thoughts on that, and
Yeah.
just this mentality is win at all costs, and we're going to do things even if it goes against the rules, written or otherwise,
Right.
and how we can kind of diffuse that mentality.
Well, look, I have a lot of thoughts about the Astros. As you know, I have a personal connection to the situation. The Astros have been a client of mine for the last couple of years, so I know a lot of people in the organization, and very specifically the manager, the now former manager of the Houston Astros, AJ Hinch, who got fired because of this whole situation, is a dear friend of mine. We're teammates and classmates from Stanford. I've known him since I was 18 years old. And we're still in touch. And like I became, for the last 5 years, I was a huge Houston Astros fan overnight because my good friend was the manager. And so I say all that just to set up to share my thoughts on it. It broke my heart what happened for a couple of reasons. Look, first and foremost, I think what's important for people to understand, and this is not to justify anything they did, there's a ton of cheating that goes on in baseball specifically. Other sports too, like I can't speak to, but I know from just being a fan, but I know from playing, baseball players are a bunch of cheaters, like all the time. There's sign stealing, there's doctoring the ball, there's corking the bat. None of it is okay. None of it's within the rules, but it's almost like an understanding that we all have as baseball players. Like there's that whole horrible saying, like, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. So I think we need to just tell the truth about that. That doesn't make it right. It's just tell the truth. The second thing I'll say, and this is not again to defend the Astros, but they got caught doing something they shouldn't have done. And that's a problem. And we need to look at the root of why would they do that? My assumption is, and I don't have any inside information, so I'm not breaking any news here. My assumption is they were not the only team in the major leagues doing that. They just happened to both A, get caught, which is a problem, and B, happened to be one of the best teams in baseball who won the World Series and had the best record in baseball over the last 5 years. So you're like Barry Bonds doing steroids is a bigger deal than, say, Brady Anderson, who played for the Baltimore Orioles, who happened to hit 52 home runs one year in the late 90s when he was doing steroids, but nobody cares because he didn't break any records. Right.
Yep.
So my issue is, look, do I think it's a problem they did it? Absolutely. It's not, you can't justify it. Cheating's wrong. And at the same time, I do find everyone's moral outrage about it to be a little bit over the top. Like, hold on a second. Let's be real. It's like something Chris Rock said back during the steroid era in baseball. He's like, hey, if you could take a pill to be better at your job and make more money, would you take it? And he's like, yeah, everybody would. Now, again, it's not right. But when those guys were doing it, did they know it was wrong? Sure. Did they know it was against the rules? Sure. But in the scheme of baseball, they were utilizing the technology that was handed to them in a way that they thought would give them a competitive advantage over their team, over their opponent. That all of that to say is, like, why have we gotten to a point where we feel like we have to, or it's okay for us to cheat, to do something to bend the rules? It goes back to that thing that coach asked you about, and that our culture is so obsessed with. We're obsessed with winning, and winning sort of, right? You win, you get all the rewards, you get all the attention, you get all the money, you get all the spoils that come with it. And what'll happen, I think, sometimes in the midst of it, we've all had moments like this in life. Every single one of us has lied. Every single one of us has cheated. Now, sometimes it's more significant than others. And it's not that it's okay, but it's a part of the human condition, and part of what we have to do for ourselves personally and when we're in leadership positions is be mindful of that and know that, look, there are times we can get away with cheating, with lying, with bending the rules, with saying things that are mostly true, but not really, in order to produce the result. And if we're incented to do that, you think about the scandal that happened with Wells Fargo a few years ago, another one of my clients, right? People were given incentives to open up bank accounts that didn't exist because that's how they were compensated. Now, is it wrong that they did it? Yeah. But why were there incentives for people to go do that? Do you know what I mean? So we have to ask ourselves the deeper question, and it becomes this sort of vicious cycle of, hey, we're getting rewarded for that. Look, in a totally different context, we know that so many young women who end up with eating disorders have the eating disorder for a couple of reasons. First of all, society tells them you have to be thin. And then they lose weight in an unhealthy way. And then people show up and say, you look great. You're amazing. You're beautiful. They get this positive affirmation. They're like, I'm going to keep doing this, even though they may know, even as a teenage girl, this is not healthy. I shouldn't be starving myself, or I shouldn't be throwing up my food, like, right? But they do it anyway. Why? Because the outcome, the reward, the result is more important than, am I doing what's right, what's healthy? So I think if we go a little bit deeper into this issue for ourselves, it's easy to point the fingers at the Houston Astros and go, they're a bunch of cheaters. However, wait a minute, where do I cheat, or where might I cheat? Or am I really mindful of what might be going on in the environment around me, where we bend the rules just a little bit because we're just trying to make sure we win? And that whole sort of nice guys finish last thing, I think, is like terrible advice, because I feel like at the end of the day, we got to live with ourselves. And one of the things that breaks my heart the most, Cletus, and I think about this, and I don't justify what Barry Bonds did or Lance Armstrong or any of these people or the Houston Astros, but what I do feel like as a sports fan and as someone who loves the games and the sports, I don't feel like when someone, an individual or a team cheats, even though I don't think it's right and I'm not condoning it, I don't think it invalidates their entire experience. The Houston Astros have been one of the best teams of baseball for the last 5 years, legit. Now, did they steal signs and cheat? Yeah, but that doesn't take away from the fact that there's extraordinary players on that team, and they did something really remarkable. Lance Armstrong did steroids and won 7 Tour de France's. And then he lied about it and got all crazy. I think that part is a little insane, but he still won the Tour de France 7 times against other people who were doping after coming back from cancer. Like, Barry Bonds hit 73 home runs in a single season in the hardest park in the history of Major League Baseball. They had a home run in, and walked 200 times that year because they wouldn't throw him a strike. If they had pitched to him and he played in like Cincinnati, he would have hit like 115 home runs that year. So like, both can be true at the same time, right? You can cheat, which is wrong, and you can still be extraordinarily talented and have amazing success. Like, you know, life isn't always quite as black and white as we see.
Fascinating. We could do a whole podcast on this. I'm sure, dude.
Obviously, I have a lot of passion about that particular issue, so I'm really glad you asked me.
I love it. I love it. Well,
one other thing I'll say, though, about that, like in the context of what's happening right now, right? I was texting with some of my friends and people who are really connected to the whole Astros situation, and I said, you know what? In the face of the coronavirus, I don't think people are going to be nearly as upset as some guy stole some signs in baseball. Again, I'm not justifying what they did, but like in the scheme of things, you know, I think it's important for us to hold ourselves and other people accountable, and then also have some perspective on what's going on, you know? And I think also what we have to be mindful of, this is like, look, with our kids, if we don't put limits on our kids for certain things, like their devices, as an example, or, you know, just having whatever food we want in the pantry, like they're going to be on their screens all day and they're going to eat all the cookies in the pantry. At least my kids are. I don't know about yours. So we have to limit that. You put, you know, a live stream of the game in the dugout with a bunch of baseball players, they're gonna be like, hey man, I know what the pitcher's throwing. Let's tell the guy at home plate. Like, that just is common sense in a certain way, and it's still wrong, but we have to be thinking about these things, you know?
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, man, congratulations on the new book coming out. We're all in this together. And if you go to mike-robbins.com/together, right? That's where you can pre-order the book.
You can.
Which is due out in a couple of weeks.
It's coming out sooner than we think, actually. I think the publisher is going to move up the publication date. So it's supposed to be May 5th. It's probably going to be sometime in April. We're still figuring that out, but we're super excited about it. And even in the midst of this crazy time, it feels like there's a lot of messages in the book that'll resonate with people.
Awesome. So I'll put the links in the show notes. So if you're listening here, you just jump in, mike-robbins.com/together. You can get access to the book. Mike Robbins on all social channels, right? Twitter and Insta and Facebook and all that is where you can find Mike. And I'm excited, man. I can't wait to get my copy and dive in. So congratulations on your 5th book.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me back on the podcast. I hope I did all right second time around.
You're in, man. You're golden. Thank you so much, man. Best of luck. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks.